Back in October, the New York Times ran a story about Trump voters who regretted their decision and were now planning on voting Democrat in 2020. They followed this story up about a month later, some of the same people. It was also accompanied by a new political campaign ad from a progressive group highlighting one of these individuals, talking about how they had voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and it was a mistake, saying that if you vote for Donald Trump again, it would be throwing fuel on the fire. The story was seemingly too good to pass up. Donald Trump's favorability has been on the rise. Even the New York Times has reported that his base is growing. His favorability is on the rise. And while, again, his approval rating has been fairly static, both his favorability and approval rating are higher than they were several years ago. So, of course, the people who don't like Donald Trump want to prop up anyone who claims to be a Trump voter who now hates him, because it fits their worldview. It proves they were right. Now, let's be real, right? Obviously, I'm very much biased against a lot of what the Democrats have done, so many of you are probably getting a similar confirmation bias from me. You would do well to reach outside this bubble. And the fact remains there certainly are Trump voters who do not like Trump today. But the truth is, to the best of my understanding, Trump's base has grown. Now, with a story this juicy, you'd have to imagine the New York Times would fact check, right? Well, it turns out they didn't. This man they claim was a Trump voter regretting his decision turns out not to have voted at all. And as far as I can tell, this part will be my opinion, I think the guy just made the whole thing up. While he's trying to claim now, no, my opinions on Trump are still, legit. I still think he's bad. I just didn't vote. No, I think he's making it up. You see, after these commercials went viral with this massive campaign, people started asking questions. And when it turned out he didn't vote for Trump anyway, many people wondered whether he actually ever supported the guy, or whether or not he just hated him the whole time, or whether or not he ever even actually cared and is only pretending now to hate the president because he has no choice. Otherwise, he's just fake news. And he is. Here's what we should do. I'm going to walk you through this story, exposing how the New York Times essentially created this character due to their negligence, their failure to do journalism. How this commercial is still up today, how the media covered it, and then his own admission where he says, I just made it up. And that's what goes viral. But it's not just about all this. I want to show you Trump's approval. I want to argue about Trump regret and the real possibility there are some Trump regretful voters. But we'll talk a bit about the fake news as well. Here's the story from the New York Times from back in October. Quote, I gave the other guy a shot. After taking a chance on Donald Trump in 2016, a swing county in western Pennsylvania is up for grabs again. Now, before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address. The best thing you can do, however, share this video. Not that it matters. Everybody's got confirmation bias anyway. I get accused of it too. And, we're all just trying to do our best. I try to be sincere and inform you to the best of my abilities, but I don't think anybody's perfect. So by all means, hate me and do nothing. Don't share. But if you do like my content, please consider sharing. Let's read the story. Notably, the story was updated December 6th, mentioning that Mark Graham did not vote in the election. But we'll come back to this. Thank you, New York Times, for at least correcting, earlier this month. Here's how the story began. Mark Graham, a real estate appraiser in this fated manufacturing hub, sat with friends at a gym named Fitness U on the morning after the Democratic debate in mid-September. He had voted for Barack Obama, but in 2016, he took a gamble on Donald Trump. Although he called the president's conduct in office a joke, he was unwilling to commit to voting Democratic in 2020, unconvinced by the 10 party hopefuls the night before. Jump ahead to October, and Democrats in Congress are investigating evidence of President Trump's possible abuse of power. Mr. Graham has had an electoral conversion. Things have changed in the last couple of weeks. More stupidity has come out, Mr. Graham, 69 said in a telephone interview last week. He hopes Democrats nominate former Vice President Joe Biden, but he is not particular. I'd vote for the Democratic nominee no matter who it is at this point, he said. If Mr. Trump gets into another 4 years where he's a lame duck, it's going to be like adding gasoline to the fire. Unfortunately, the story's just not true. Now, what I find particularly interesting about this, and the reason I wanted to cover it, is while I certainly think, I have my bias, I certainly think there are regretful voters who voted for Trump and don't want to vote in 2020, CNN ran a story where they went to a Democratic stronghold, I believe it was Minnesota, and found that although this was a town that traditionally votes Democrat and still does, when it comes to the president, they were supporting Donald Trump. You combine that with his polls, with the metrics, and what we've seen in terms of the growth of his base, and stories like this seem to be just too good to be true for those who hate the president. And presumably there are a lot of people who do, so I guess it's possible. But this story was from October 7th. Something interesting happened. On November 12th, another story was written by the New York Times. Democratic ad campaign spotlights Trump voters with regrets. Quote, "I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that I voted for Donald Trump at this point," a voter said in one of the ads, which will air in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, 3 key swing states. Check this out. They also have the same correction, which I'll come back to in a second. Here's how the story begins. A Democratic group unveiled a $3 million advertising campaign Tuesday featuring people who supported President Trump but now regret it. The first wave of a year-long effort to reclaim some of the voters in the industrial Midwest who helped tip the 2016 election. The group, American Bridge, will air commercials in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania that are first-person testimonials from residents of each state explaining why they backed Mr. Trump in 2016 and why they will not do so again this year. While it's not uncommon to spotlight voters in political advertising, these commercials feature no narration and are set documentary style in the homes and towns of those on camera. "We want to create a permission structure in these communities," says the president of American Bridge. "We want them to know it wasn't just me, but you have to create space for people to defect." Well, the commercial is still up. Pennsylvania, Mark, with 50,000 views, published November 12th, 2019. The commercial shows the man, let me see if I can play a little bit of it. The commercial shows the man, Mark Graham, where he, in no uncertain terms, says, yes, he did vote for Donald Trump in 2016. Well, we know he didn't. The organization American Bridge says, American Bridge is the largest research, video tracking, and rapid response organization in Democratic politics. We find what Republicans are hiding and make sure voters hear about it. But what happens when this organization doesn't do their due diligence, or at the very worst, lies? You get this story. The correction now reads, editor's note, December 10th, 2019. After this article was published, local news media reported that Mark Graham, a voter featured in the American Bridge ad campaign, and another article by The Times, did not vote in the 2016 election. The Times has confirmed those reports. While Mr. Graham acknowledged misspeaking about his voting record, he said the Times article and the ad campaign accurately reflect his feelings about the 2016 race and President Trump's performance in office. I'm sorry. The New York Times said he was misspeaking? I think we have a word for this. It's actually lying. When you claim to have voted for somebody over the period of several months repeatedly, and it turns out you didn't, that would be lying, not misspeaking. The previous article from the New York Times was updated on the 6th, saying after this article was published, local news media reported that Mark Graham did not vote in the 2016 election. The Times has confirmed that Mr. Graham did not vote in the election. Well, Mr. Graham acknowledged misspeaking about his voting record. He said the article accurately reflects his feelings about the 2016 race and President Trump's performance in office. Interesting choice of correction, New York Times, because at least as it appears, according to local media, he didn't misspeak, he lied. And apparently he said, I just made it up. Well, it does seem like maybe he's trying to walk it back because he's being called out by a lot of people for lying. As far as I can tell, based on what I've seen in the reporting, my opinion would be that this man straight up lied. And he wasn't a Trump supporter, he didn't vote, and he just wanted the attention. And he got it. It worked, and the media couldn't resist. The anti-Trump activists wanted the narrative, they got their narrative, and no one did their due diligence save local media. Thank you, local media. You know, it wasn't just the New York Times, though. The ad was picked up. Look at this story. November 12th, The Hill. New ads show Trump supporters saying they made a mistake with 13,261 shares. And once again, there's good old Mark, the guy who made it up. He said, I don't think Donald Trump is on the side of the American people. I think he's on his own side. Unfortunately, this man, as we now know, is not a voter. He's not somebody who supported the president, and maybe he's claiming to. But check out the expose from December 6th, the story that broke the fake news into a million pieces. From Erie News Now, Part 1, Mark Graham tells story of how he became involved in anti-Trump ad. In an interview with Erie News Now, Mark Graham talks about the ad that caused an uproar yesterday and prompted people to challenge his credibility. They report, people in northwestern Pennsylvania are still talking about the story Erie News Now was the first to report yesterday. It's the story of Mark Graham, a man who said in a television ad that he voted for Donald Trump in 2016, but would not vote for him in 2020. Yesterday, we reported that voting records reveal that Graham did not vote at all in 2016. During an interview yesterday with reporter John Last, Graham told how he, a registered Republican, became involved with a Democratic Political Action Committee's ad campaign to discredit the president. He said it all started with a focus group formed in 2018 by congressional candidate Ron DeNicola. Graham said the focus group was comprised of local Republicans who supported DeNicola's run for Congress. Former Erie County Director of Administration Jerry Mifsud was working with DeNicola. Quote, I sat through this focus group and a New York Times reporter had sought out Jerry. How he got Jerry, I don't know. Maybe it was DeNicola. Maybe it was the Democratic Party, Graham said. The reporter wanted to do a story on President Trump's popularity in Erie. He asked the focus group how they felt about the president. That's when I told him, it's like if you re-elect this guy, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire. Mark Graham then goes on to say, I just made it up. He said, I like that. I'm going to use that. And that's according to Mark Graham. So the writing of this seems confusing, but here's my general takeaway. Mark Graham acknowledged throwing gasoline on a fire, he just made up. And the reporter then said, I like that. I'm going to use that. And the reporter did. And the New York Times reporter was there looking for, I can only assume, this story. He did no fact checking. The man, Mark Graham, made this up and the New York Times ran it uncritically. And this is where it gets really crazy because the New York Times runs this story. New York Times, with their massive reach, then this political action organization apparently finds out, asks him to do a commercial to repeat the lies that he just made up. And there you go. A narrative is born. Fortunately, we have good journalists in local communities who dug into this and proved this guy was making it all up. They say after the New York Times article was published, Graham was contacted by a representative of the local political action committee called American Bridge. They met at a local restaurant and the representative sized up Graham. Seeing if I photographed well, if I talk well, or if I have any type of criteria that fit his reasoning to be here, said Graham. Apparently I did because he signed me a paper saying, would you be interested in making a video? I said, I don't care. The ad man then looked for a place to shoot the anti-Trump ad and fell in love with Graham's Creekside property in Fairview Township. So he comes out here and he goes, can we shoot the video here? John, absolutely. I get to show off a little bit, said Graham. They go on to say there will be a part 2 of this interview, and I'll pull that up in a second. But based on what I've seen so far from this local reporting, Graham has admitted to making up his anti-Trump quote. He was chosen for this. They were trying to see if he looked good enough on camera, and he even says, I get to show off a bit. It's clear that this guy wanted the attention, and the media was more than willing to give it to him, which is what we see so often. Now, I have the second part of this story. He does go on to say, my opinions, I stand by them. I really feel this way about the president, but I'm not going to take his word for it. He goes on to say that a woman contacted him saying that you're my hero. And he says, just because I made that commercial, I'm her hero. He loved the attention. He loved being that guy who regretted Trump, that turnaround story, that token Trump voter who now regrets his 2016 vote. But it turns out to be fake. But I want to be honest. I want to be fair. You can't deny that there certainly are people who voted for Trump who now do not like the man. And if you think that's not true, you got another thing coming, especially Trump voters. You better be prepared because there's going to be a massive voter turnout. But let's also be real. While I can certainly point out there are people who no longer like Trump and did before, and there is a subreddit dedicated to calling this out called Trump Gret. Trump Gret is really just anti-Trump activists who don't like the guy. They've actually posted this tweet from a woman who said, I voted for Trump in 2016. I was ride or die. Stood in line in the rain for 6 hours to get into a rally. Struggling for 2020. I have CP and a woman. He's mocked everything I stand for. The economy is better than ever, though. There's not a Dem worth voting for. It's a real struggle. This is one of the top posts on a subreddit, a forum, dedicated to highlighting people who voted for Trump who now regret it. If this is one of the best things they can do, then I would say Trump's opponents have a serious problem. If you've got a woman saying that Trump has mocked everything she stands for and she's still considering voting for him, I don't think we're seeing a problem with Trump's chances. I think we're seeing a problem with the Democrats' chances. What we're seeing here about the economy is sentiment repeated by so many people. Yeah, they don't like the guy. I certainly don't. And I've pointed this out. You're going to have to go to those people in Detroit who are looking at new Ford factories coming in and say, hey, who cares about the economy, right? Trump's a bad dude. And they're going to tell you no. They're not going to side. Look at the headline for this post. They said, he's mocking everything I stand for, but the money is good. You better damn well believe it. The money is good. Absolutely. These people know that Trump has done bad things. She's replying to Meghan McCain of all people. But they know the economy is better than ever. Let me show you something. We don't got to trust the New York Times. And boy, do I have a lot to call them out for. But it was the New York Times who reported that Trump's base is growing. On August 7th, a couple months before this Trump regret story emerges, Nate Cohn for The Upshot reports, don't assume Trump's approval rating can't climb higher. It already has. Millions of Americans who did not like the president in 2016 now say they do. They say the share of Americans who say they have a favorable view of him has increased significantly since the 2016 election. And this is why the story was so important, the Trump regret. It's so important to highlight. Because the reality is, based on every metric, it really just seems like Trump is becoming more popular. Take a look at Trump's favorability. I love highlighting this. I do it so often. We can look back to 2016 when Trump was running. Right around the time he actually got elected, his favorability was in the mid-30s. When he was running, it was in the high 20s. Then he got elected. And it peaked around 44.7, falls down to around a low of 38. And today, it's around 42. This is not job approval. This is favorability. This is, do you like the man at all? It's much higher than when he was even campaigning and then he won. But look at his approval rating. In his presidency, in 2017, his approval rating was low. It's higher today. Now, let's be real. His disapproval rating is way higher in the aggregate. But Trump, what I'm trying to show here is not that Trump is beloved by everybody, but that it's fair to say his base is growing. So are we likely to see real stories of Trump voters who regret their decision? Yes, of course. But if you look at the data, it would seem you're more likely to find people who didn't vote for Trump who are now considering voting for the man. It's not about whether or not you like the guy. It's about whether or not he is going to win in 2020. And I will tell you this to all the annoying people who are like, Tim won't talk about why Trump is bad. It's like, okay, I think I do enough, but I'm also not here to play that game. If the Democrats and the people on the left can't see what's happening in front of them, they're going to lose. And this is the information they need to hear. Not that I'm here to say you should or shouldn't vote for the president. It's to say this is happening. And if you ignore this, he's going to win. And then you're going to cry about it all over again. All right? You want to run these fake stories with fake Trump voters who claim they don't want to vote for him again? Fine, by all means. But the reality is Trump's base is growing, and even people with presumably cerebral palsy by CP, presumably somebody who says Trump is mocking everything I stand for, if people are still going to support him because the economy is good, congratulations, you've lost. But I want to finish this off with a shout out to the fake news media because, well, that's what we're really looking at. The New York Times could have easily fact-checked this story. They didn't want to. It was a good story, right? Why bother doing 5 minutes of work looking up a voting record for a guy? Seriously, not that difficult. And bravo to the local media who did. Here's a story from the Washington Post. And I may do segments on this for my 6 p.m. Hour. Rachel Maddow rooted for the Steele dossier to be true, then it fell apart. Is Rachel Maddow ever going to get any comeuppance for all of the insane fake news conspiracy nonsense she's been pushing? What about when she accused One America News of being Russian propaganda and then got sued for it? This is an older story. I think she may have won this one because the argument was, it may have been dismissed, I'm not sure. The argument was that she's like entertainment, it's not real anyway. Why does Rachel Maddow get to say insane nonsense and she gets away with it? Look, man, if you want to watch my videos, if you want to accuse me of being biased, fine, I don't care. Call me whatever you want to call me. I just call it like I see it. Talk about what I care about. But Rachel Maddow not only is biased, but she's lying. I mean, at least I'm not lying. I show you all my sources. I started doing this on purpose because people were accusing me of lying. I'm like, no, I'm telling you what the New York Times said. I'm showing you all of the reporting, and I'm using a third-party fact-checking organization to prove, to check my own bias, say, don't look at me, look at the third-party organization in the mainstream news saying it. Apparently that's not good enough. So by all means, call me biased, I don't care. I'm sourcing what I say. I believe it is fair to say, based on everything I've shown you, I think it's reasonable for you to conclude, to agree with me, that it's more likely than not Trump's base is growing. While there certainly are Trump-gret voters, it's less likely to be the case. So they could have fact-checked the story, but instead now they have egg on their face. They ran fake news multiple times, and this guy just wanted the attention, apparently. But I'll wrap it up with one much bigger fake news story I absolutely love. This is about Star Wars. And you may think, who cares about Star Wars, Tim? No. They're claiming, look at this. They say a recent study by Morton Bay, a University of Southern California digital media researcher, revealed that over 50% of the venom directed on Twitter at Rian Johnson, director of The Last Jedi, came from the same sources as Russian election meddling. It all comes full circle, doesn't it? Me wanting to do a video about the fake news, end up talking about Russian interference, and somehow end up roping in Star Wars. Because that's what we have today. And I think the reason is the algorithm. Because when you run a story like this, you can use the keywords Russian meddling, Rian Johnson, The Last Jedi, Star Wars. It all comes together, and you're more likely to pop up on Google for these different keywords that are searched for. Well, the reality is the New York Times once again wrote fake news. You see, as CNN then corrects, no, half of The Last Jedi haters were not Russian trolls. The fact was, I think about 1 in 10 was presumably a bot. Whether or not it was Russian, we don't know, or a troll, we don't know. But the New York Times is wrong. Again, the New York Times has been wrong a lot. So now we live in this world where the New York Times isn't fact-checking, and we rely on local journalism. But you know what's really scary? The local journalism is dying out, and the New York Times is taking over. And they're hiring weird, crazy ideologues who pump out fake news because it gets clicks. But you knew that. You knew that. You don't need me to say it. The fact remains, it's hard to know what to trust. And I want to make sure it's clear. Just because I'm highlighting this one story showing that this Trump gret is fake news doesn't mean the right doesn't have their own fake versions as well. The problem, is there a newspaper of prominence on the right like that has done what the New York Times has done? And I'm sorry, the answer is no. The story we have here, once again, is that the New York Times, the gray lady, the paper of record, for 2 months ran a fake story with a fake Trump voter because it was too good to pass up. And they could have at any moment taken 5 minutes to figure out this guy was lying. And they didn't. So when the Wall Street Journal puts out, bad, crappy news, I'll call it out, like they did with YouTube and PewDiePie. And I did all those years ago when it happened. But today it's the New York Times trying to pile on to Donald Trump to make it seem like people don't like the guy. Look, man, you don't need to do that. You want to argue against Trump, do it fairly, and you can win. But the more they play these games and the more they lie, the less likely it will be. Because those people who weren't Trump voters in 2016, who are now seeing what the New York Times is doing, are questioning everything they heard since then. This is how you convince people to actually vote for the man. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. at youtube.com/TimCastNews, and I will see you all then.